Saudi Crown Prince Salman, Mohammed bin Salman's actions in recent developments, like expressing interest to join BRICS, giving special waiver like removing police verification requirements for Saudi visa for Indians, and other military and strategic cooperation with India, and wanting to get away from the Western Bloc. Are we seeing Saudi Arabia as an important player in the current geopolitical world order? Very good question. Very good question. Let's take a look at the map. Now, I don't have a separate map for Saudi Arabia, so we will go to the map that I always use. Let's take a look at Saudi Arabia from the perspective of geography. So India is here, as we all know, in the center of the screen. You go westwards, you have the Arabian Peninsula. Our nearest maritime neighbor is Oman. Then you have Yemen, and if you go further west, you have Saudi Arabia. After crossing the UAE, so Saudi Arabia is not really very far from us. It's obviously it's the world's largest producer, if I'm not mistaken, of petroleum products, oil, gas, all that, mainly oil, yes. And that's why it is prosperous, and that's why it is geopolitically incredibly important and significant, and that's why the Americans have so much of an interest in Saudi Arabia. So this entire nation was carved out of the chaos in the aftermath of the so-called First World War, which was the first European tribal war. Yes, and this nation state was established by this kingdom was established by the British. And later on, after the decline of the British Empire and the transference of power from London to Washington, the Americans became the major patrons of Saudi Arabia, and they have propped up this dynasty, the House of Saud, and they are the major beneficiaries. They have been the major beneficiaries of oil from this region. Now the Americans are a major oil producer through fracking, through shale oil, all that. So, and yet Saudi Arabia is a major nation because it contributes a significant amount of the oil that is consumed globally, and it has a very big say in the oil prices. The amount of production that it does has a direct impact on the oil prices in the world. It is obviously the major nation in the OPEC plus group, which is the cartel of petroleum exporting countries. Now, India and Saudi Arabia, the past 6-7 years, ever since Mr. Modi came to power, the relations between India and Saudi Arabia ever since have been excellent. Mr. Modi has made it a point to ensure that India and Saudi Arabia and other nations in the Gulf region have excellent relations, right? Even the UAE, even Oman, India even has a couple of military bases, if I'm not mistaken. Let's not talk about it here. But yes, we have excellent cooperation with Oman, with the UAE, excellent relations, and with Saudi Arabia. And the Saudis are most likely, if I'm not mistaken, India's number one or number two supplier of oil. Yes. Now, recently, what happened is before the midterm elections, inflation was rising in the US. Gasoline prices had risen significantly, and Joe Biden requested the Saudis to ramp up oil production so that the prices will go down and he will win the election. He even visited Saudi Arabia, but the Saudis refused, and they cut down. Instead of increasing oil production, they cut oil production by 2%, which caused a certain amount of surging, a certain percentage increase in the oil prices worldwide, which is something the Americans, I can assure you, are greatly annoyed about. That is a bad thing from their perspective. Our vassal state is refusing to obey our orders. What on earth is happening? That's not good from their perspective. So that is a red mark against Mohammed bin Salman from the American perspective. Now Mohammed bin Salman is saying that he wants to join BRICS. That essentially for the Americans is like their vassal state saying that I will now no longer obey you and I will go and join the enemy camp. That's essentially what it means from the US perspective. That is a very dangerous game that Mohammed bin Salman is playing. He's a very brave man. And clearly he wants to wean away his nation from the US influence. The thing is this. Today there are US troops on Saudi territory, more or less permanently stationed there. You can look it up what the numbers are, where the US military bases are. And the Saudis, they buy significant quantities of US weaponry every year. The Saudis have one of the top 5 military budgets in the world, if I'm not mistaken. I think the top 5, it's in the top 5, and they exclusively buy US weaponry. So it's heavily dependent on the US from that perspective. It's a US client state. It's a US puppet state. It's a US vassal state. It's been that for a very long time. Now Mohammed bin Salman wants to take his nation out of the clutches of the empire, of the superpower. And these are all steps that he is taking in that direction. Not obeying the US diktat to ramp up oil production. Instead, he's cutting oil production. That is a sign of rebellion. Then expressing his intent, his willingness, his desire to join BRICS. That is an even bigger act of rebellion. Yes. In this great closeness with India, giving various waivers to Indians for acquiring Saudi visas. No more. There's no more any need for police verification. Yeah. So these are all steps that bring the two nations closer. Now, India is a nation that the US would want to make their vassal state, but India is steadfastly refused. That we will not bow to your diktats, and we will not, you know, become another Japan. So India has an independent foreign policy. The Saudis want to create an independent policy, foreign policy, and that's what we are seeing. That these steps are in that direction. If the Saudis succeed, if Mohammed bin Salman succeeds in taking Saudi Arabia out of the clutches of the empire, or even partially out of the clutches, and become a member of BRICS, and if he succeeds in surviving this transition period, this pivot, then Saudi Arabia could become a significantly important player in the Middle East and in the overall geopolitical world order. It's a difficult thing to do. Why is it difficult? Because BRICS, before Saudi Arabia, Iran has applied to join BRICS. If you study some history, you will realize that Saudi Arabia and Iran are essentially like enemies. They have a very fraught relationship. They have a very hostile relationship. Saudi Arabia and Iran. These are more or less enemy nations. So if Saudi Arabia has to join BRICS, they will have to make some kind of peace with Iran. It's possible, but it's complicated. Yeah. So that's one obstacle in the way. But I'm sure if India and China can possibly perhaps make things work, I'm sure Saudi Arabia and Iran can also possibly perhaps make things work. But the main problem is the overlord, the United States, the empire, the superpower. Will Mohammed bin Salman succeed in achieving this transition, this pivot to the East? He would like to become part of the East, the Eastern Bloc, not the Western Bloc. Will the Americans allow him to do this? I can assure you the Americans will throw everything, will use every lever, every asset that they have at their disposal to stop Mohammed bin Salman from transitioning, from pivoting to the East. You will, I am pretty sure very soon you will start seeing all kinds of articles in the English speaking media, the global media, about how bad and brutal and unjust of a ruler Mohammed bin Salman is, how undemocratic he is, what sort of atrocities are being done in Saudi Arabia against LGBTQ plus people. What is the situation, the position of women in Saudi society, how downtrodden it is, and how despotic and brutal and evil of a dictator Mohammed bin Salman is. Obviously, the Jamal Khashoggi case is there. They can always bring that out, right? I can sense this coming very soon if Mohammed bin Salman persists in steering his nation eastwards. So it will start like that, and then they will use every other means at their disposal, including regime change. So I would say that if Mohammed bin Salman is determined to do this, he must have done some very tough and hard calculations, and he must have come to the conclusion that he is in a position to actually succeed, maybe try and do this, and he will obviously have to look out for his own personal safety. Yeah. So it's a very bold move that he is making. It is a very dangerous thing that he's doing, going up against the overlord, and it could be very dangerous for me. We know what happens to US puppets who turn their backs on the US and try to become independent. Iraq tried to do that. They tried to suddenly create their own independent foreign policy. Yeah, that's what Saddam Hussein tried to do. We know what happened to him, and there are many more examples. So yeah, I even hear that Xi Jinping is due to visit Riyadh very soon, maybe in a week, maybe in a month or so. Yeah, he's scheduled to visit Riyadh. So yeah, that could be a move in that direction, that Saudi Arabia wants to become part of BRICS. And since China is the number one nation in the BRICS group, he will have to run it past Xi Jinping. So maybe that's what's happening. Yeah. So Xi Jinping is personally going to visit Riyadh. Xi Jinping usually doesn't travel much. He recently went to Bali. Now he is going to imminently soon visit Riyadh. So there will be something happening there. So, and then Saudi Arabia will have to make good with Iran in some way. Find a working relationship, a way of cooperating, a way of lessening the tensions, and so on. So yeah, it's a complicated situation. It's a complicated scenario that we're witnessing. Global geopolitics right now is very complicated, and there's a whole lot of realignment happening. But overall, if Mohammed bin Salman is able to somehow successfully pull this off, then Saudi Arabia will become a major addition to the Eastern Bloc, to the BRICS bloc, and it could become a major player in geopolitics. But it is a very dangerous thing. The Middle East has been in crisis for decades. It's all being the strings are all being pulled from the West. They have created these artificial lines of conflict, of tensions, sectarian tensions, national tensions, and all that. And they could pull off something else. So you could see things getting really bad in the Middle East. Maybe next year. This year is the year of the Ukraine war. Maybe 2023 will be the year of tensions and crisis in the Middle East. I may be wrong. Maybe I'll be right. Let's see how 2023 goes. I think 2023 the focus will be on the Middle East and on Saudi Arabia and on BRICS, and not so much on Ukraine. Let's see how it goes.